A woman failed to arrive at work one morning, and before long, police were called in. From the very beginning, detectives found themselves at a standstill. The scene was filled with evidence, yet none of it pointed them toward a clear suspect, and the investigation remained unsolved for years. But when the mystery was finally unraveled, the truth was so unbelievable that it stunned everyone involved. Leslie Jennings was born on October 5, 1952, in Rhode Island. She grew up as one of 8 siblings, and because her father served in the military, the family relocated frequently throughout her childhood. When Leslie was 12, they settled in Pensacola, Florida, where she completed high school. She later attended the University of Florida, pursuing a degree in journalism, and it was there that she met a young man named Carl. In 1974, at the age of 22, Leslie married him, and 3 years later they welcomed their daughter, Lauren. Eventually, the family moved to Chevy Chase, a quiet suburb just outside Washington, D.C., where Leslie began working at an advertising agency. Over the years, she built a peaceful and predictable life. On the morning of May 2, 2001, 48-year-old Leslie was expected to arrive at work by 10 a.m., but she never came. By around 10:30, her manager became concerned. Leslie had always been dependable and had never missed work without notifying anyone. He checked the emergency contact list and called her daughter. But Lauren was away at college and hadn't spoken to her mother that morning. With no answers, the manager reached out to Leslie's husband. Carl said he had left home around 7:30 a.m. while Leslie was still getting ready. Normally, she would leave shortly afterward, walk to the bus stop, and take the bus into Washington, a commute that usually lasted about an hour. By then, she should have already been at the office. Carl tried calling the house, but no one answered. Fearing that something was wrong, he immediately drove home, while Leslie's boss did the same out of growing concern. They arrived at the house at roughly 11:30 a.m. and stepped inside. Almost immediately, they noticed the front door was unlocked, and the house was eerily quiet. As they moved farther in, they spotted what looked like blood smeared along the hallway walls, with bloody footprints leading across the floor. Leslie's boss quickly dialed 911 while Carl searched the home. He found their dog locked inside the basement, but Leslie was nowhere to be found. The dispatcher instructed both men to leave the house immediately to avoid contaminating any evidence, and they waited outside with the dog until officers arrived. Police reached the scene within minutes and began a systematic search. Upstairs, they made a horrifying discovery. Leslie's body was lying face down inside the shower stall in the bathroom. Based on her position, investigators believed she had been killed somewhere else in the house before being dragged upstairs. It appeared the killer had intended to wash away blood and any possible DNA evidence. Crime scene investigators also noticed clear signs that someone had attempted to clean blood from the hallway and nearby floor. Additional bloodstains were found in the kitchen sink, downstairs bathroom, and even on the trash can, showing that the killer had remained inside the house after the attack, trying to erase the evidence. But considering the sheer amount of blood left behind, the cleanup effort had clearly failed. One detail especially caught investigators' attention. Cleaning chemicals had been used throughout the scene, yet none of those products belonged in the house. That suggested the attacker had brought them along, indicating the cleanup had been planned in advance. Despite all of these suspicious findings, the local police department initially decided there wasn't enough evidence to officially rule the case a homicide. Instead, they waited for the medical examiner's report, leaving open the possibility that Leslie's death had somehow been accidental. One theory suggested she might have slipped while cleaning the bathroom, although that explanation didn't fit the physical evidence. Because of that decision, the home wasn't processed with the urgency of a murder scene. Critical evidence was overlooked, including blood found on a door frame that investigators never bothered to swab. Meanwhile, news of Leslie's death spread rapidly through the community, leaving residents stunned. Chevy Chase was known as one of the safest communities in the country, where murders were almost unheard of. As days passed without answers, the lack of information from investigators only deepened the fear and uncertainty. 2 days later, the autopsy results finally arrived and erased any remaining doubt. Leslie had been murdered. She suffered 7 separate head wounds caused by repeated impacts against a hard object with sharp edges. Investigators later matched those injuries to the sharp corners of the hallway baseboards, concluding that the attacker had knocked her to the ground before repeatedly slamming her head into them. Her body also showed numerous abrasions from a violent struggle, along with unmistakable signs of strangulation. The findings confirmed what detectives had suspected from the beginning. Leslie had been attacked and killed in the hallway before her body was dragged upstairs in an attempt to destroy the evidence. Forensic teams collected every blood sample they could find throughout the home and sent them for DNA testing. With the case now officially classified as a homicide, detectives launched a full-scale investigation. While waiting for the lab results, they interviewed Leslie's family, friends, and co-workers. No one could think of anyone who might have wanted to harm her. She was well-liked, avoided conflict, and had no known enemies. As with most investigations, detectives first examined her husband, Carl. He repeated that he had left for work around 7:30 that morning, and a neighbor confirmed seeing him drive away after waving towards someone standing at the window. His co-workers also verified that he arrived at work on time and remained there until he received the phone call from Leslie's boss. Unless he had somehow killed her before leaving the house, his timeline appeared to hold up. Detectives also noticed he had no cuts, bruises, or scratches, injuries they would have expected considering the defensive wounds Leslie suffered during the attack. On top of that, everyone who knew the couple described their marriage as loving, stable, and free of any serious problems. A short time later, the lab results came back. Forensics had identified foreign DNA mixed with Leslie's blood in 3 different spots throughout the house. They also found bits of skin under her fingernails, pointing to the same unknown individual. The problem was the DNA didn't match anyone in the database. Testing against Carl's DNA also came back negative. Detectives went on to collect samples from several other men who knew Leslie, but none of those were a match either. There were no other solid leads at the crime scene, and detectives quickly hit a wall. They tried piecing together a timeline and realized the killer had just a little over 2 hours to break into the house, carry out the murder, attempt a cleanup, and then get away. Since the blood hadn't been fully washed off, investigators even considered the possibility that the killer might still have been inside when Carl and Leslie's boss showed up. Maybe he spotted them through a window and slipped out the back door before they came in. With no real evidence or motive to go on, police started looking into whether Leslie's case could be tied to a string of burglaries in the area. But that theory went nowhere. A short time later, the county pulled together a special task force to review unsolved murders across nearby towns. There were 6 in total, and investigators thought they might be connected. In the end, though, that link was ruled out. For months after, the case went nowhere. Detectives kept running down different suspects, but every lead fizzled out. One of the biggest problems was motive. The killer hadn't stolen anything valuable from the house, and there was no sign of personal grudges. Leslie simply didn't have enemies. To detectives, it all looked like a completely random killing, a crime with no real sense behind it. From that point on, the case went cold for years, and detectives made no progress toward an arrest. Some people still believed the killer had to be Carl, that somehow he'd managed to outsmart investigators and walk away free. But Leslie's daughter never once believed her father was guilty. She stood by him through it all. That continued until 2017, when Carl passed away of natural causes. Later, his daughter said he died of a broken heart, never knowing who had taken his wife from him. In 2022, 21 years after Leslie's murder, the local police department put together a special cold case team. They reopened her case, but the killer's DNA still wasn't showing up in the FBI's genetic database. So, detectives went back over everything. They re-entered everyone connected to the investigation, and once again reached out to the public, hoping that after all these years, someone might finally come forward with new information. But once again, nothing. That's when investigators decided to try a new approach. They sent the existing DNA samples to a company which specialized in genetic genealogy. The way it works is pretty simple and complicated at the same time. Investigators take an unknown DNA sample and run it through public genealogy databases where people upload their own results. Almost every time, at least one relative pops up, even if it's a distant one. From there, experts build out family trees and trace them back to the most likely suspect, narrowing it down by things like age, location, and other details. The experts at Aram got to work, and before long they managed to identify a relative of the killer, a man living in Romania. The connection turned out to be pretty distant. So, it took another 2 years of digging through family trees before they finally got close to a real suspect. By 2024, they had zeroed in on a family that had been living in Leslie's town at the time of the murder. Their last name was Glee. And the moment detectives heard it, they realized it wasn't unfamiliar. Looking back through the old case files, they found a tip that had come in nearly a year after the murder, pointing directly at a man named Eugene Gligor, a former neighbor. But that wasn't all. Detectives also discovered that Eugene had once dated the victim's daughter, Lauren. The two had been together for about 5 years. They first met in high school when they were both 15. Eugene lived just a 10-minute walk from Lauren's house, and he spent a lot of time there. Leslie thought he was a great guy, but Lauren's father never trusted him. He always said there was something off about Eugene, though he could never quite explain what it was. When they turned 20 and Lauren left for college, the relationship started to fizzle out, and eventually they broke up. It was a clean break. Eugene didn't seem bitter or angry, and from that point on, Lauren barely stayed in touch with him. Over the years, though, Eugene racked up a string of arrests for illegal weapons possession, theft, and drunk driving. What made it strange was that he came from a well-off family and didn't need to steal cheap things from other people's homes. Still, none of those charges were serious enough to require him to submit a DNA sample, which explained why his profile was never in the FBI database. There was also another troubling incident that dated back to when Eugene and Lauren were 16. A woman had been attacked by a teenager, and she gave police a description that closely matched Eugene. He denied it, and none of his friends could imagine him doing something like that. In fact, Lauren and one of her friends even went down to the police station themselves to vouch for him, insisting he was completely harmless. At the time of Leslie's murder, Eugene was just 21. Detectives also uncovered another interesting detail. Only 2 months after the killing, he and his mother moved to Washington, D.C. From then on, he stayed off the radar, never getting into trouble again. What stood out was that even though a neighbor had tipped police off about him back in 2002, detectives never actually spoke to him about Leslie's case. But now, with his name flagged by the genealogical search, Eugene instantly became their prime suspect. By 2024, he was still living in D.C. and working for a company that sold surveillance equipment. Investigators started thinking about how to get a sample of his DNA, and that's when they learned he was due to return from Europe on June 9, 2024. They came up with a plan and reached out to airport staff for help. The plan was simple. A border officer pulled Eugene aside for what looked like a routine check. On the table nearby, they'd set out a few bottles of water. and Eugene casually grabbed one. A little later, he tossed the empty bottle into the trash, and detectives moved in right away. They collected it and sent it straight to the lab. Forensic experts swabbed the bottle for DNA and compared it to the genetic material found under Leslie's fingernails. It was a perfect match. That meant one thing: Leslie had scratched Eugene during the attack, leaving his DNA behind at the scene of her murder. With that undeniable evidence, detectives finally had their killer. A few days later, police approached Eugene outside his apartment and placed him under arrest. They brought Eugene in for questioning, and at first, the detectives kept things basic, asking when he'd last spoken to his ex-girlfriend or her mother, and whether he'd ever set foot in their house after the breakup. Eugene acted confused, like he didn't even know what they were talking about. And eventually, he asked for a lawyer. That was when the detective finally revealed the evidence they had been holding back. Eugene's DNA had been identified inside the victim's home. The moment he heard those words, he froze. Clearly caught off guard, he insisted he had never provided a DNA sample in his entire life. Struggling to find an explanation, he nervously claimed he couldn't remember anything and said he had no idea what to tell them. The detectives reminded him that if he wanted an attorney present, the interview would have to stop until one arrived. Eugene hesitated before asking if he could call his girlfriend for advice because he didn't know what to do. It was obvious he was falling apart. His hands shook uncontrollably, his voice cracked, and he appeared to break down in tears. He argued that they were treating him as guilty before he had ever stood trial. But one of the detectives noticed something unusual. Despite all the sobbing, not a single tear actually ran down his face. She pointed it out immediately. Eugene quickly tried to explain it away, saying he was dehydrated and his eyes were too dry to produce tears. Within moments, his composure completely collapsed. He complained that his bloodshot eyes were only from being exhausted and emotionally drained, then accused the detectives of trying to frame him, while once again insisting he couldn't remember anything. By the time the interrogation ended, investigators were more convinced than ever that they had the right man. His forced display of emotion and constantly shifting explanations only strengthened their suspicions. More importantly, the overwhelming amount of his DNA recovered from the crime scene meant they didn't need a confession. Soon afterward, Eugene was formally charged with first-degree murder. His arrest stunned many people who knew him. Friends and relatives described him as friendly, cheerful, and generous, someone who regularly donated to charities and actively participated in community events. But not everyone was caught off guard. One of his former girlfriends revealed that during arguments, he would suddenly explode with rage, throwing objects across the room and punching holes through walls. Even his own brother admitted he had always been afraid of Eugene, believing he was capable of serious violence. Meanwhile, Lauren struggled to accept the truth. The thought that her former boyfriend had murdered her mother was almost impossible to comprehend. She remembered seeing Eugene shortly after Leslie's death and telling him what had happened. He had hugged her and quietly said he was sorry, never revealing that investigators would later accuse him of being the killer. Preparing the case for trial took nearly another year, and by May 2025, prosecutors offered Eugene a plea agreement. If he admitted guilt, the first-degree murder charge would be reduced to second-degree murder, acknowledging that the killing had not been premeditated and reducing the maximum possible sentence to 30 years in prison. Eugene accepted the deal and pleaded guilty. However, the agreement came with one major limitation. He was never required to explain what had actually happened or why he killed Leslie. Even today, his motive remains unknown. Detectives questioned him repeatedly, hoping he would finally reveal the truth, but he refused to say another word. Investigators eventually developed their own theory. They believe the crime may have begun as a burglary that spiraled out of control. Eugene had previously been connected to multiple theft investigations, leading detectives to suspect he intended to steal from the Jennings home. Since he was familiar with the house, it would have seemed like an easy target. They believe he may have assumed no one was home, only to unexpectedly encounter Leslie. Because she knew him personally, he couldn't risk being identified, and in a moment of panic, he may have decided to kill her. Still, that explanation leaves important questions unanswered. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere in the house, making it unclear how Eugene got inside. One possibility is that he simply knocked on the door, and because Leslie had known him for years, she let him in without hesitation. If that's what happened, the attack could have started almost immediately in the hallway. But if robbery truly wasn't the motive, then what was? And if his intention had been to murder her from the beginning, why didn't he arrive carrying a weapon? Those questions have never been answered, and unless Eugene eventually decides to speak, the real reason behind Leslie's murder may remain a mystery forever. In late August 2025, he was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Yet even then, he refused to explain why he had taken her life. The case also sparked serious criticism of the police department. Investigators had actually received a tip mentioning Eugene's name only a year after the murder. But for reasons that have never been explained, they never interviewed him or collected his DNA. Had they done so back in 2002, the case might have been solved decades earlier. Unfortunately, that opportunity was lost forever. Even so, the investigation ultimately made history as the first case in Maryland to be solved using genetic genealogy, a groundbreaking technique that has since helped investigators solve hundreds of cold cases across the United States. Let me know what you think about this incredible case in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like. Let's move on to the next case. When a dedicated nurse suddenly failed to report for work, her co-workers knew something was wrong and alerted authorities without delay. Police responded expecting a routine welfare check, but they had no idea they were about to step into one of the most shocking and baffling investigations of their careers, as the truth slowly came to light. Even veteran detectives struggled to comprehend what had happened, and the case would go on to be remembered as one of the most chilling crimes ever documented. Tracy Wildbin was born on September 29, 1966, in California. At 14 years old, her life changed when her parents divorced, leading her to move to Riverside with her father and older brother. There, she quickly settled in, becoming best friends with her next-door neighbor Trish, while also spending much of her time with her cousin Tanya. The three girls were inseparable, filling their days with roller skating, shopping, and horseback riding. Years later, after Trish's mother married Tracy's father, the lifelong friends officially became sisters. Following high school, Tracy and Trish completed nursing school together and began their careers as nurses. At 25, Tracy married a man named Richard and relocated to Arizona, where they welcomed their daughter, Kristen. The marriage eventually ended in divorce, leaving Tracy to raise Kristen as a single mother while continuing her nursing career and relocating several times in search of better opportunities. Despite the moves, she remained close to her family, especially after a series of heartbreaking tragedies claimed the lives of her brother and three half-siblings, forcing her father and stepmother to raise the orphaned children. In 2009, Tracy remarried and moved to Tennessee. But that marriage also ended within a year. She then relocated to Alabama, where her cousin Tanya helped her secure a nursing position at the same nursing home where she worked. Starting over wasn't easy. Money was scarce. She relied on public transportation because she couldn't afford a car, and she carefully saved every extra dollar hoping to buy one so she could also visit her grown daughter in another state. Then, on October 13, 2010, 44-year-old Tracy unexpectedly failed to arrive for her scheduled shift. Her co-workers were immediately concerned because she had earned a reputation for being reliable and had never missed work before. After repeated calls went unanswered, her employer contacted the landlord, who lived nearby and had a spare key. When he entered the apartment, he found the home eerily quiet. Calling Tracy's name brought no response. As he stepped into the bedroom, he was met with a horrifying sight. Tracy was lying motionless on the floor with severe head injuries. Realizing she was beyond help, he rushed outside and called 911. When investigators arrived, it didn't take long for them to conclude they weren't dealing with a natural death, but a brutal homicide. The victim wasn't wearing any clothes, and there were 2 stab wounds on her back along with a lot of other injuries, including defensive wounds and a cut across her throat. The whole picture looked like she'd been tortured for hours, and detectives believed the killer took pleasure in it. Later, the medical examiner confirmed she died from blood loss. They also determined she'd been sexually assaulted in a brutal way, and they officially confirmed the victim was Tracy. Forensics sent samples from her body to the lab for DNA testing along with blood collected from inside the house and other evidence. Detectives were hoping the killer had left something behind they could match, but the local lab said it would take at least a few weeks to process everything. There were no signs of forced entry, which suggested Tracy either knew her killer or he talked his way inside. In the bedroom, they found a handgun on the floor near her body. And since there were no firearm-related injuries, that detail didn't make sense at first. Was it Tracy's gun and she tried to stop the attacker? Or did he bring it and for some reason never use it? Detectives spoke with Tracy's family and co-workers, trying to figure out if anyone might have wanted to harm her. They checked out her ex-husbands, but both were in other states with airtight alibis. Next, investigators started piecing together the timeline of the day before the incident, hoping for a lead. They talked to her cousin and learned that that morning, Tanya's boyfriend drove both women to the nursing home to pick up their paychecks. After that, they went to the bank and cashed them. Then, Tracy asked to stop by a used car lot because she finally had enough saved to buy a car. She'd already found a model she liked on their website and wanted to see it in person. She did like it and said she planned to buy it soon. Tanya and her boyfriend dropped her back home after that, and that was the last time anyone saw her alive. Detectives also asked the family if Tracy had a gun, and Tanya's boyfriend said he was the one who'd given her one. According to him, just before she died, she'd complained about a man named Richardson who was harassing her and acting odd. He kept showing up around the place where she lived, and police tracked him down fast. He really did act suspicious, and detectives started to look at him seriously, but in the end, Richardson had a solid alibi. So, investigators were back to square one. They kept talking to Tracy's relatives, and at some point, the lead detective noticed that James, Tanya's boyfriend, had a pretty deep, fresh cut on his pinky. He'd seen that kind of injury before in violent altercations. When blood slicks the handle and the knife slides in your grip, it's easy for the blade to jump and slice the person's own hand. When the detective asked how he got it, James said it happened doing something around the house. Still, it was hard to ignore, especially with James's handgun turning up on the bedroom floor next to Tracy's body. James denied having anything to do with the incident. He insisted that he and Tanya dropped Tracy at home, went back to their place, and stayed in for the rest of the day. Police started checking his story, and Tanya backed him up. They pulled bank camera footage and spoke with the used car lot employee. Tracy had been at all the places James mentioned exactly when he said she was. Little by little, detectives started to doubt he was their guy because it just didn't look like he had the window to pull this off. In the end, detectives were empty-handed again. They kept running through every man who could have possibly done it. But every lead stalled out, and after a few days, they were starting to doubt they'd ever get to the truth. The DNA results still weren't back, and out of sheer frustration, the lead detective decided to bring James in one more time. At the station, he got straight to it and asked if anything intimate had happened between him and Tracy. It's a classic move. It pins a suspect to a clear answer, and if the lab later finds his DNA on her after he's denied any sexual contact, that denial can be used against him. James insisted there was nothing romantic between them because Tracy was his girlfriend's cousin, so he never even looked at her that way. But the detective kept pressing, and eventually, to their surprise, James changed his story. He admitted that he'd been intimate with Tracy that day, with Tanya there too, according to James. After they left the dealership, the three of them went back to Tracy's place, and everything that happened inside was consensual. He even walked detectives through the details, but kept saying that when it was over, he and Tanya drove home and Tracy was fine. The only reason he kept that part from police at first, he said, was because he didn't want to embarrass Tanya since she was Tracy's cousin. But detectives didn't buy it. With James' handgun found on the bedroom floor near Tracy's body, they figured there was a real chance he'd used it to pressure her and then harmed her. But no matter how hard they pushed, he stuck to his story and kept insisting he was innocent. At one point, they asked him to take a polygraph, and he said he'd be happy to. But what was the point if those results don't hold up in court? Not long after, he shut down the interview altogether. But by then, police felt they had enough to arrest him and wait for the DNA results while he sat in jail. As for Tanya, officers took her into custody too, because she'd given James an alibi that he later blew up with his new version of events. Over the next few weeks, investigators kept working the case and waited on the lab. But the DNA still wasn't ready. About a month after Tanya and James were taken into custody, the jail staff reached out to detectives with something unexpected. An inmate wanted to talk about Tracy's murder, so the officers headed over right away. The inmate said Tanya had confessed to killing her cousin and even gave a short rundown of what had happened. She claimed that Tanya and James went into Tracy's house. Tanya gave James a signal, and he jumped her. After that, the two of them took turns assaulting her at gunpoint before James killed her. Detectives got the inmate to put it all in writing, and that's when they came up with a pretty unusual play. They wanted a confession from James and decided to bluff their way to it. They brought him in and read this out, but tweaked the wording so it sounded like Tanya herself was testifying against him, making it clear she was pinning everything on James and was ready to take the stand. To cap it off, they told him that if he owned up and showed real remorse, he might even avoid prison time. It wasn't realistic at all, obviously, but they could see he was close to breaking. And the tactic worked. James agreed to confess and started telling a story that would shake even experienced detectives. According to James, he and Tanya met about a month before everything happened and immediately bonded over drugs and their love for crime shows, binge-watching CSI crime scene investigation. In one particular episode, there was a story about two brothers who kidnapped a woman to torture her. Right after that, James told Tanya he'd been wanting to do something like that for a long time, and she said she felt the same way. She wanted to kidnap a woman, abuse, and torture her, and then kill her. From there, they started working on a plan to make those fantasies real. At first, they talked about picking a random victim at a supermarket, luring her into their car, and taking her. But they decided that was too risky. So, they settled on choosing someone they knew, figuring it would be easier to control her and force her to do whatever they wanted. They picked Tracy, who trusted Tanya and was grateful that she'd helped her get the nursing job. In the days leading up to the murder, James cut back sharply on drugs so he'd be clear enough to drive and carry out the attack. One day, they drove Tracy home and were ready to act, but she didn't invite them inside. But later, when they brought her back from the car dealership, James asked to use the bathroom, and Tracy let him in. While he was there, Tanya and Tracy stood in the living room, and that's when the plan kicked off. Tanya gave the prearranged signal by striking Tracy across the face. James immediately bolted out of the bathroom, overpowered her, and Tracy blacked out. They carried the victim to the bedroom, restrained her, and waited for her to regain consciousness. Then, under threat, they started forcing her to follow their commands. Tanya and James both harmed her in brutal ways, and even the detectives who'd seen a lot were shocked by how twisted it all was. Eventually, they moved on to what they called the final part of the plan, the killing. Something that excited them both, and they never intended to leave Tracy still alive. James suddenly pulled out a knife and repeatedly stabbed her in the neck and back. As he attacked, he kept telling her he was sorry and that none of this was her fault, but insisted she had to die. Once it was over, he and Tanya tried to clean the blood from the scene, then showered together before leaving the house. They had originally planned to set the home on fire to destroy the evidence, but abandoned the idea after noticing neighbors nearby. Back at Tanya's apartment, the two were intimate, later admitting they were still excited by what they had just done. While James confessed, detectives were struck by his complete lack of remorse. Rather than showing guilt, he appeared almost pleased with himself. Both he and Tanya were soon charged with murder, kidnapping, and several other crimes. Meanwhile, forensic testing confirmed investigators' suspicions. Their DNA was found throughout Tracy's home and all over her body, leaving behind overwhelming physical evidence. Nearly 4 years later, in 2014, James finally stood trial. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, while his defense team argued against it, claiming there was no evidence Tracy had not consented to relations with him. His attorneys also presented testimony about his traumatic childhood. Family members described years of horrific abuse, neglect, and abandonment. His mother struggled with drug addiction and illicit activity, often leaving James and his sister alone for days without food. After she was murdered, he entered foster care, where the abuse continued. As an adult, he fell into drug addiction and turned to crime to support his habit, causing his mental health to deteriorate even further. However, court-appointed mental health experts concluded he fully understood the difference between right and wrong and was legally responsible for his actions. The jury ultimately found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death. Although he spent years appealing the conviction, every challenge failed. Then, in 2018, his attorneys secured a new sentencing hearing. They prepared to once again argue against the death penalty, but during the proceedings, James stunned everyone by telling his lawyer to stop fighting on his behalf, saying he deserved to die. Tanya, meanwhile, accepted a plea agreement that required her to testify against James. In return, prosecutors agreed to seek life in prison instead of the death penalty. During her sentencing, she broke down in tears and apologized for her role in the crime. But Tracy's loved ones weren't convinced. Trish, Tracy's lifelong best friend, who had known both Tracy and Tanya since childhood, attended every hearing. After Tanya's statement, she said she believed the apology was nothing more than an act. According to Trish, Tanya had been jealous of Tracy for years and may have secretly resented her all along. Finally, in April 2025, James was executed by lethal injection. In his final statement, he said he had refused to speak Tracy's name for the past 15 years because he felt he didn't deserve to. But in his last moments, he finally addressed her directly, saying, "Tracy, forgive me." Let's move on to the next case. A young woman was driving home after spending the 4th of July celebrating with friends, but she never made it back. From the very first moments of the investigation, detectives uncovered a series of unsettling and downright baffling clues. Even so, nothing could have prepared them for the horrifying truth that was waiting to be exposed. And when everything finally came to light, the case would be remembered as one of the most chilling crimes in California's history. Megan Barroso was born on March 15, 1981, in the town of Camarillo, California. When she was still a young child, her parents divorced, and she went to live with her mother, although her father remained an important part of her life and visited her regularly. As she grew up, Megan developed a love for dancing, and it quickly became the thing she was most passionate about. During her high school years, her mother lost her job at the local hospital, forcing the two of them to move to the small town of Templeton, nearly 3 hours away. The move was especially difficult for Megan because it meant leaving behind the school she loved and all of her close friends. After graduating from high school, she decided to move back closer to home. She rented a small apartment in Moorpark, enrolled at the local community college, and found a job as an assistant in the purchasing department of a clothing manufacturing company. Her plan was to eventually transfer to a university, although she still hadn't decided what she wanted to study. She was excited to be reunited with her old friends, and around the same time her father had remarried and welcomed a baby boy, so Megan made an effort to visit them whenever she could. On July 4th, 2001, 20-year-old Megan planned to spend the holiday with her friends. It was Independence Day, and fireworks celebrations were taking place all over the area. She started the afternoon at her friend Lindsay's house, where Lindsay's family was hosting a barbecue. Everyone was having a great time, and later that evening they were invited to a beach party in a nearby town. Megan left her car at Lindsay's house, and another group of friends came by to pick them up. The party was relaxed and enjoyable. They spent some time inside before heading down to the beach to watch the fireworks, and later they stopped by another friend's house. Around 2 a.m., they were dropped back off at Lindsay's place. Lindsay offered to let Megan stay the night since the drive back to her apartment would take a while, but Megan declined because she had work early the next morning and wanted to get home. As the two hugged goodbye, Megan accidentally knocked over her purse, spilling almost everything onto the ground. They both crouched down to gather her belongings, but in the confusion, Megan unknowingly picked up Lindsay's cell phone instead of her own. Neither of them realized the mistake, and Megan drove away. A few minutes later, Lindsay noticed her phone was missing and figured Megan had taken it by accident. She called her cell phone using the house phone. Megan answered, turned her car around, returned to give the phone back, and then finally started driving home again. At around 4 a.m., a security guard was patrolling one of the streets in Moorpark, checking on the nearby businesses when he heard several loud popping sounds coming from a nearby road. Assuming someone was still setting off leftover fireworks, he drove over to investigate. Instead, he found a car sitting abandoned in the middle of the street. It was partially resting on the median. The engine was still running. The driver's door was wide open, and both the headlights and windshield wipers were on, yet there wasn't a single person anywhere around. At first, he assumed a drunk holiday driver had crashed and fled the scene, but then he noticed something unusual. One woman's flip-flop was lying on the road while the other remained underneath the driver's seat. That immediately struck him as odd. Why would someone leave the scene of an accident without even taking both of her shoes? He stepped closer and looked inside the vehicle. That's when he saw dark red stains throughout the interior. The instant he realized it was blood, he backed away and immediately called the police. The officers started examining the car and spotted a few bullet holes. Most were riddled across the windshield, and the driver's side window was completely shattered. With all that blood inside the cabin, at least one of those bullets had to have hit the driver, but the cops immediately picked up on something weird. There wasn't a single drop of blood outside the car. If she'd gotten out on her own, blood would have definitely spilled onto the pavement, so they figured the shooter might have grabbed the woman who was in there and taken her with them. On the left side of the car, the officers noticed some deep scratches, like another vehicle had sideswiped it. Right by the driver's seat was a purse splattered with blood. There were no documents or ID inside, but tucked underneath the seat where the purse had been sitting, they found a cell phone, also smeared with blood. While the forensics team combed through the car itself, the police scoured the area for any leads, and it didn't take long to find a few shell casings. Experts quickly determined they came from an AK-47 assault rifle. All of this painted a pretty grim picture for the police. According to the investigators, the woman behind the wheel had probably stopped at a traffic light when the PER pulled up next to her. He rammed her car, and she tried to speed away from him, but the guy pulled out an assault rifle and unloaded on her vehicle. It looked like one or more bullets hit her, causing her to lose control and veer onto the median. What happened next was still a total mystery, but the detectives figured the attacker might have grabbed her and hauled her off in his own car. They also realized her wounds probably weren't fatal given the relatively small amount of blood in the cabin. While investigators were piecing everything together, the cops ran the plates and discovered the car was a rental. They contacted the company, and that's when they learned it had been rented by Megan. The detectives called around to every hospital in the area, but she hadn't shown up at any of them. That only made their theory about her being kidnapped even stronger. But they still had zero leads to point them in the right direction. There were no foreign fingerprints in the car, no surveillance cameras on the road, and at the time it all went down, not a single witness drove by. The detectives headed out to speak with Megan's friends and family. Everyone told them the same thing. They had no clue who could have wanted to hurt her. She wasn't the type to get into fights with anyone. She didn't have a boyfriend or any messy exes, and honestly, she'd never made any enemies in her life. The cops also spoke with Lindsay, who filled them in on everything that happened that day. According to her, she and Megan had a great time. Nothing weird or out of the ordinary happened at all. The only thing that really stuck out to her was this guy named John, whose house by the beach was hosting the party. Lindsay knew him, but it was Megan's first time meeting him. Throughout the night, John kept coming up to Lindsay, asking her to introduce him to Megan. But she kept shutting him down. She told him Megan wasn't the kind of girl who'd be into a quick fling, and that was exactly what John was after. The police questioned him, but the guy swore he never left the party, and everyone there backed him up, saying he was at the house until the early morning. So, investigators crossed him off their list and shifted focus back to finding Megan. Police brought in search dogs to check the car, but they only followed her scent a few yards before stopping cold, as if it just disappeared right there. That only fueled detectives' theory that some unknown attacker had grabbed Megan, tossed her into his car, and taken off. Even with all that, police still launched a search around the area where the car was found. Officers hit the streets, combed through the nearby mountains, and checked along the banks of a small river. They even brought in helicopters with infrared sensors to scan from above, but none of it turned up a single lead. Meanwhile, the detectives discovered that Megan's car had this device, kind of like a black box, which logged everything that happened with the vehicle. The cops dove into that data and also brought in ballistic experts to map out the trajectories of all the bullets based on the holes in the car. Putting it all together, they came up with a clearer picture of what happened with Megan. Someone sideswiped her car on the driver's side, and she floored the gas pedal to get away. It seemed like the attacker sped ahead and disappeared out of sight because Megan ended up stopping at a traffic light. Maybe she figured the guy was long gone, but apparently he was lying in wait just up ahead, not far from that light. When she pulled to a stop, he started firing at her car. From what the ballistic expert said, those initial shots missed her, so she hit the gas again. But as Megan drove past the shooter, he fired one more time, and that bullet hit her in the stomach. That's when she lost control and veered onto the median. After that, Megan reached for her phone, which was in her purse. That's what the blood traces suggested. But right then, the attacker walked up to her car, and whatever happened next remained a total mystery. As soon as the details of what happened hit the media, this case blew up as one of the biggest topics in the whole county. People were terrified that some unknown psycho was out there blasting cars with an assault rifle, and they were demanding the police catch him immediately. Officers set up roadblocks to question as many drivers as possible. They were hoping to track down at least one person who'd driven through that morning. But all they found were a handful of folks who'd spotted Megan's car abandoned in the middle of the road. All of them just assumed some drunk had crashed and then ditched the scene. So none of these people bothered calling the cops. The detectives also launched a tip hotline, which got flooded with a few hundred calls. Most led straight to dead ends, but pretty soon the police got this pretty bizarre lead. An anonymous caller tipped him off, saying that on the morning of July 5th, he'd seen some guy stuffing what looked like Megan's body into the trunk of a burgundy sedan. Moreover, it all went down near these mountains with a seriously bad reputation, where bodies turned up way too often. The detectives rushed out to search that spot right away, and they even released information about the burgundy sedan, hoping to find more witnesses. But in the end, it all came up empty. In the days that followed, investigators hit a total wall. They were starting to seriously doubt they'd ever find Megan alive. Still, they didn't let up. They poured everything they had into the case, chasing down every possible lead. With nothing solid to go on, police went back to Megan's closest friends and family, digging deeper to see if any suspect might have been hiding in plain sight. They even brought in handwriting experts to analyze her work documents, looking for any signs that she might have been stressed or anxious in the days leading up to her disappearance. Even with the dead ends piling up, the cops kept pushing forward with the search. And at one point, they stumbled across a human skull up in the mountains. Experts jumped on it and quickly figured out it belonged to a man who vanished the year before. A few weeks after Megan went missing, the police put out a $25,000 reward for information. And later, they rolled out a website dedicated to the case, complete with details and a form for submitting tips. A little while later, investigators brought in a well-known profiler named Sharon Hagen. She'd later go on to help create the movie Zodiac and several true crime shows about killers. After digging through every detail of the case, she concluded that the perpetrator most likely had a personal motive. But the detectives didn't agree with it. They were convinced it was some kind of road rage incident that just spiraled out of control. Sharon, though, was positive the guy had kidnapped Megan to assault her. What's more, she believed this wasn't his first time pulling something like this, and she even dug up a few other cases that could tie back to the same criminal. 2 years before this all went down, a woman named Joanna was just chilling in her bed when a man in a mask armed with a knife burst into her room. He claimed he was a cop and ordered her to strip down completely. Then he grabbed her car keys, shoved her into the passenger seat, and drove her to a park where a blanket was already spread out on the grass. There, he assaulted her, and afterward, he just drove the poor woman back home like nothing happened. Then there was another incident. Just a few days before Megan vanished, a 22-year-old woman named Donna was walking down the street when out of nowhere, a man dressed head to toe in black jumped out from the bushes. Knife in hand, he forced her to toss her phone into the bushes and get into his car. Right there in the vehicle, he assaulted her. then blindfolded her and took her to some house where he continued assaulting her. After he was done, he actually started comforting her. He promised he'd let her go in time for her morning shift at work and even offered her a soda. Eventually, he drove her back to the spot where he grabbed her and even helped her find her phone in the bushes. As soon as she was safe, Donna called the cops and gave them a full description of the guy, but they never tracked him down. Still, the detectives weren't quick to link this to Megan's disappearance, so they kept chasing down any fresh leads they could find. But all their efforts just kept hitting dead ends. Things dragged on like that for a few more days until the case took this totally unexpected twist. On July 26th, a man from a nearby town called the cops and reported that his neighbor had burglarized his house. Officers arrested 31-year-old Vincent Sanchez and found out he was living with two roommates, one of whom owned an AK-47, and Sanchez had easy access to it. That said, the police in this town had no idea about Megan's case. So, the fact that he had this kind of rare weapon, something most regular folks don't just have lying around, barely raised an eyebrow. They hauled Sanchez off to jail, where he made a call to one of his roommates and asked for a huge favor. Get rid of this bag he tossed into a dumpster near the house. The roommate figured the bag must have had the stolen stuff from the neighbor's place, since the cops still hadn't recovered any of it. So, he fished out the bag and peeked inside. But what he found was nothing like what he expected. It was packed with a bunch of videotapes. Curiosity got the best of him. He wanted to know why Sanchez was so freaked out about the cops fighting these tapes. So, he took them home and popped one in. To his absolute horror, the footage showed tied-up women being assaulted by a guy in a ski mask. The man was talking to his victims, and right away, the roommate recognized Sanchez's voice. Some of those videos were even filmed right in the house they shared. The roommate realized Sanchez had been bringing his victims there, and he'd had no clue the whole time. Then he noticed the bag wasn't just tapes. There were several pairs of women's underwear in there, plus a ton of photos of women in explicit poses. He didn't recognize most of them, but one stood out. It was Sanchez's girlfriend, the one he'd been dating for 3 years. In the end, the roommate called the police, and officers showed up to grab the bag. They also searched Sanchez's room, turning up even more photos of women, plus a few pairs of women's underwear, and all sorts of female belongings. And that wasn't all. There were knives, a shotgun, handcuffs, and a video camera. So, what started out as a simple theft investigation snowballed into something far darker and much bigger. The cops realized that all the women in those videos were Sanchez's victims, and now they had the grim task of figuring out who they were. As the full scale of it sank in, they called in Sharon, the profiler we mentioned earlier. Turns out, she'd already been tracking a serial predator who'd been attacking women across the city for years, and she'd been studying every one of his victims in detail. There were over 10 of them, and Sharon spotted them instantly on those tapes. She was convinced Sanchez was the guy behind it all, but him wearing a mask in every recording threw a major wrench in the police's work. As she pored over the footage, Sharon caught another creepy red flag. It looked like the attacker had been stalking his victims for a while before striking. He'd casually dropped personal details about their lives, like what school they'd gone to, who they were seeing, or where they worked. In trying to connect Sanchez to all these crimes, Sharon thought back to Donna's kidnapping, which went down just a few days before Megan disappeared. Donna had told the cops the guy wasn't wearing any mask at all and gave them a solid description of his looks. Sharon was convinced it was the same creep behind it, so she reached out to Donna and had her come down to the station. There, they set up a lineup with a few men, Sanchez among them. Without a second of hesitation, Donna pointed straight at him and said he was the one who grabbed her. By that point, Sanchez was already staring down a serious prison sentence. But Sharon wasn't done yet. She wanted to prove he was behind every single attack. Then, she learned he had access to an AK-47. And since all his crimes revolved around assault, she immediately started to suspect he might also be behind Megan's kidnapping. She tipped off the detectives about this, and they went to Sanchez's place to take a look at the rifle. His roommate, the one who actually owned it, showed it to them, and right away they noticed it was missing the cleaning rod. That thin metal piece that clips under the barrel. The roommate said it had just gone missing. And that's when the investigators realized Sanchez might really be tied to Megan's case, because a matching cleaning rod had been found near her car, and it even helped prove that her vehicle had been hit with the rounds from an AK-47. From there, the detectives asked the roommate if they could take a look around Sanchez's room. They didn't have a warrant yet, but since one of the housemates gave them permission, they were clear to check it out. Their colleagues had already picked up anything that seemed suspicious. But there was one thing they'd clearly missed. A woman's jacket lying right there on the floor. It matched the one Megan was wearing the night she disappeared. So, the officers quickly got a warrant and rushed that jacket straight to the lab. While the investigators waited on those lab results, they sat down with Sanchez's roommates and asked them about his whereabouts on July 4th. According to them, a bunch of friends swung by that evening, and they celebrated Independence Day until around 10 p.m. After that, the guests started heading out, but Sanchez kept knocking back drinks with one of the roommates. Before long, that guy called it a night and went to bed, leaving Sanchez to crash on the living room floor since one of the guests had already taken his room. But when the roommate woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom, Sanchez was nowhere to be seen in the living room. 2 hours later, he got up again, and Sanchez was still gone. That's when he heard some strange noises coming from outside and looked out the window. To his surprise, there was Sanchez scrubbing down his pickup truck. It just felt off who washes their car at 4 in the morning. The other roommate rolled out of bed around 5:30, and Sanchez was still at it cleaning his car. Later on, he commented that the truck looked way fresher, especially after he'd shampooed the seats. One roommate's girlfriend noticed a fresh, long scratch on the pickup and asked Sanchez what happened. He brushed it off, saying he'd been caught in traffic and someone had bumped into him. On top of that, detectives talked to Sanchez's best friend, who said that on July 4th he'd been really down because things with his girlfriend were falling apart. That night, he kept calling her over and over, but she just wouldn't pick up. The detectives then found out that the house of his girlfriend's sister, where a holiday party had been held, was just a stone's throw away from Megan's friend's place. They started piecing together a theory. Sanchez might have headed there, planning to confront his girlfriend. But by the time he showed up, the party was already over. As for the AK-47, they knew he'd thrown around death threats to her family members who tried to talk her out of dating him, so it's possible he grabbed the rifle to scare them. But when he got there, everyone in the house was already asleep. Left alone on that quiet, deserted road, Sanchez may have seen Megan saying goodbye to her friend and decided to follow her, setting the stage for the attack. As investigators continued putting the pieces together, Sanchez, with nowhere left to run, finally admitted to sexually assaulting several women. Faced with an overwhelming amount of evidence, he realized there was no way out. He confessed that he would stalk his victims, learn everything he could about their daily routines, and even sneak into their homes beforehand to familiarize himself with the layout before kidnapping them. But when detectives questioned him about Megan, he completely denied having anything to do with her disappearance. By then, however, investigators were convinced she was no longer alive, and after speaking with one of Sanchez's closest friends, they developed a strong suspicion about where her body had been hidden. His friend told detectives that Sanchez had once taken him to a remote canyon and casually remarked that it would be the perfect place to dump a body. Acting on that lead, police organized a massive search involving nearly 3,000 volunteers. The rugged landscape made progress painfully slow, but while the search continued, forensic testing produced another major breakthrough. Crime lab analysts discovered tiny traces of blood on a jacket recovered from Sanchez's apartment, and DNA testing confirmed the blood belonged to Megan. Investigators also used luminol inside Sanchez's van and uncovered extensive blood evidence. However, the vehicle had been cleaned so thoroughly that no usable DNA could be recovered from those stains. As detectives continued gathering evidence, search dogs were brought into the canyon to assist. Before long, one of the dogs alerted officers to a narrow ravine hidden away from the main trails. At the bottom, investigators discovered human remains. The body had decomposed too severely to be identified visually, but officers noticed a ring on one of the victim's fingers that matched the one Megan always wore. Medical examiners later confirmed the remains were indeed hers. Their examination revealed she had been struck by a single gunshot that had missed all of her vital organs. But because of the body's advanced state of decomposition, they couldn't determine whether she had been sexually assaulted. They did, however, uncover one deeply disturbing detail. Megan was wearing underwear that didn't belong to her. Since several previous victims had reported that Sanchez forced them to wear underwear he supplied, detectives believed he had likely done the same to Megan before assaulting her. At that point, prosecutors already had enough evidence to move forward with murder charges. But the forensic team uncovered yet another crucial piece of evidence. While examining the inside of Sanchez's pickup truck, investigators found several tiny pieces of glitter. Matching glitter was also recovered from Megan's hair and from her jacket. Earlier that night, one of Megan's friends had brought glitter to the party, and everyone had sprinkled it into their hair for fun. Under microscopic examination, experts determined the glitter was an uncommon hexagonal variety that changed color depending on the angle of the light. Even more remarkably, investigators found an identical piece of glitter on an AK-47 that Sanchez had access to, strengthening the prosecution's case and placing him even closer to the murder. On August 10th, Sanchez was formally charged with 62 criminal counts, including the assaults of 13 other women, and those represented only the cases where investigators had gathered enough evidence to file charges. A few months later, on October 4th, Sanchez attempted to plead guilty to Megan's murder, but the judge refused to accept the plea because Sanchez would not admit to a specific degree of murder or acknowledge the aggravating circumstances required in a capital case. Since prosecutors were seeking the death penalty, those legal distinctions were essential, forcing the case to proceed to trial. During the proceedings, Sanchez's attorney argued that prosecutors couldn't prove Megan had been alive during any sexual assault, claiming the lack of that evidence meant the death penalty shouldn't apply. Nevertheless, the trial moved forward in 2003. Rather than arguing that Sanchez was innocent, the defense focused on claiming the killing had not been premeditated. But the prosecution presented an overwhelming body of forensic and circumstantial evidence, leaving little room for doubt. The jury ultimately convicted Sanchez of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death. 3 years later, however, California placed a moratorium on executions, meaning the sentence was never carried out. Instead, Sanchez has remained behind bars ever since, serving the rest of his life in prison. He is now 55 years old and is expected to spend the remainder of his life incarcerated. In the end, Megan's murder was finally solved, but investigators have never completely ruled out the possibility that Sanchez had additional victims. Megan is believed to be the only person he murdered, yet questions still remain about how many women he may have sexually assaulted. Even today, that uncertainty continues to linger. Share your thoughts on this case in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like. Let's move on to the next case. A law student suddenly went silent with her family and friends, prompting them to raise the alarm. Once authorities stepped in, the investigation unfolded with shocking twists and turns straight out of a gripping crime thriller, eventually revealing one of the darkest and most disturbing cases in the nation's history. Lauren Giddings was born on April 18, 1984, in Tacoma Park, Maryland, where she was raised in a warm, supportive household alongside her caring parents and two younger sisters, with whom she shared a particularly close bond. From an early age, Lauren possessed a strong sense of faith and a genuine passion for helping others, which inspired her to pursue a career as a public defender, advocating for those unable to afford legal representation. To achieve this, she attended Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, where she thrived academically and even served as president of the school's Federalist Society chapter. She later secured an internship at a law firm in Atlanta, where she met David, and the pair began dating. They maintained their long-distance relationship after she returned to Macon, with plans to marry once she completed law school. In the summer of 2011, at age 27, Lauren graduated, but the bar exam still loomed ahead. She dedicated weeks to intense preparation, pausing only briefly to attend her younger sister's wedding in Maryland, before heading back to Georgia for a modest end-of-year gathering with classmates. Soon after, she informed loved ones that she would be isolating herself to focus fully on studying and requested they not contact her. From then on, Lauren went completely dark. Initially, her circle assumed she was simply immersed in exam prep, but days later, on June 29th, her sister, then on her honeymoon, grew deeply concerned after Lauren failed to open any of the shared photos. Sensing something was off, she contacted one of Lauren's friends, who tried calling without success as the calls went straight to voicemail. Accompanied by her boyfriend, the friend drove to Lauren's apartment in a modest student housing complex near the university. Lauren's car remained parked outside, but knocking yielded no response. Using a spare key, they entered to find the place in disarray, understandable given Lauren's upcoming move-in with David the next day, with bags and luggage strewn about. But Lauren was missing, even though her purse, phone, and laptop were all left behind. Nothing added up. Why would she vanish without her essentials or vehicle? The friend rallied others, and a group search ensued across campus and surrounding areas, revealing that no one had seen or heard from Lauren in days. Her family rushed from Maryland to join the effort, while friends continued looking through the night until, with no leads by morning, they notified the police. Officers inspected the unit and found no evidence of forced entry or a struggle. Yet the abrupt disappearance raised red flags, leading to a forensic team processing the scene. When they applied luminol, the bathroom tub lit up brightly, indicating a substantial amount of blood had been cleaned there. Fearing the worst, investigators pivoted to locating Lauren's body. Outside, an officer detected the unmistakable odor of decomposition and traced it to the complex dumpsters, lifting the lid just before a garbage truck arrived, thanks to police vehicles blocking access. A fortunate coincidence that likely saved the evidence from a landfill. They discovered a large black bag containing a woman's torso head missing, but presumed to be Lauren. They kept the grim find under wraps initially to protect the case. Friends and family later revealed Lauren had been reporting odd occurrences in her apartment for weeks. Items seemingly rearranged with no signs of intrusion despite locked doors, leaving her questioning her sanity. She also sensed being watched at times and installed a door security bar, but the unsettling events persisted. Something she had confided to her boyfriend shortly before vanishing. He tried to calm her down, suggesting it was probably just some pranksters fooling around, and that she had nothing to worry about. Police quickly looked into her boyfriend David and found that he'd been out of state during the time of the murder. There was no way he could have done it, so they ruled him out almost immediately. Meanwhile, forensic investigators combed through Lauren's apartment, looking for fingerprints or any other trace evidence. But it looked as if someone had done a meticulous cleaning job. Every surface seemed freshly wiped down with cleaning products. In hopes of finding something, they decided to remove the entire bathtub and send it to the lab for DNA testing. Not long after, medical examiners confirmed that the torso found in the dumpster was indeed Lauren's, officially turning the case into a homicide. They estimated that she'd been killed around June 26th, roughly 3 days before her friends and family started looking for her. However, the exact cause of death couldn't be determined, and there were no signs of sexual assault. Despite detectives' efforts to keep the investigation under wraps, the sudden police activity drew attention from reporters. Soon, journalists were gathering outside the apartment complex, filming news segments and spreading rumors that the police had found a body, even though officially no one had confirmed that yet. Detectives decided to question everyone living in the complex and check their apartments, just in case the killer was someone who lived right next door. All of the residents, who were also Mercer law students, immediately agreed to let the police in without a warrant. All except one, 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel. Stephen lived right next door to Lauren, but he flat out refused to let officers into his apartment. He told them that, as a law student, he strongly believed in protecting his privacy and that he had nothing to hide. Naturally, that raised a lot of red flags for investigators. They started looking into him and quickly learned that Stephen had actually been helping with the search for Lauren the previous day. He'd even given an interview to reporters earlier that morning. He wasn't just some random neighbor. He'd been her classmate, a fellow law student, and even served as vice president of the same student law society where Lauren was president. So yes, he knew her very well, but for some reason, he was refusing to let police see his apartment. And yet, he stayed right in the middle of everything happening around the complex, hovering near officers, chatting with other residents, and talking to journalists. During the interview, Stephen told reporters how he and a few of Lauren's friends had gone into her apartment and searched the neighborhood, trying to find her. But while talking about Lauren, he started referring to her in the past tense, even though at that point, no one yet knew for sure she was dead.
Yeah, Lauren was my neighbor. We're just trying to find out where she is at this point. I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I mean, the last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since.
Did you see her hang out with anyone at the time, anything like that?
I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I haven't seen anything. I mean, you always hear noise outside, but it's just people walking by pretty much.
And she just recently graduated from Mercer?
Yeah, she and I were both JD students. We graduated back in May.
What kind of person was she? I mean, what did you see?
I mean, she's as nice as can be. I mean, very personable, very much a people person.
Do you know any enemies she might have had, somebody that might want to hurt her?
No, we don't know where she is. I mean, the only thing we can think is that maybe she went out running and someone snatched her. Because we went over. One of her friends had a key. We went inside and tried to see if there was anything amiss, but she had a door jamb that was sitting right by it, so there was no sign that anyone broke in. The door was locked when everyone got here. We just don't know where she is.
When the reporters mentioned that police might have found a body near the dumpsters, Stephen went completely silent. His face changed instantly. He froze, staring off into space, not saying a word. The journalist kept talking, asking if he was okay. And after a few seconds, Stephen quietly said he needed to sit down.
What about in the the parking lot area. I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they had recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? I mean, we don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? Like, they took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. So that's how we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
Eventually, he resumed the interview, trying to answer questions again. Though now he was acting very dramatic.
I don't know anyone that would want to hurt her. She was as nice a person as there is.
What's going on in your mind right now? Like, what are you thinking?
Why would anyone do this?
She didn't hear anything?
No.
Didn't see anybody?
I just heard something. Maybe I could have helped.
It's okay, don't worry. Do you want to sit down for a second?
And after the reporters left, Stephen just sat there for a long time, completely still, staring off into the distance. A few hours later, Stephen suddenly changed his mind and told police they could search his apartment after all. The moment detectives stepped inside, they were hit with what looked like organized chaos. Large piles of canned food, energy drinks, random junk, and a lot of weapons. But what really caught their attention came next. Hidden among his things were 2 keys. A master key that could open any door in the complex, and another one, a duplicate that fit Lauren's apartment specifically. When they confronted him, Stephen admitted that he'd broken into several neighboring units when the tenants weren't at home. And in one case, he'd stolen a box of condoms. Strangely, he added that he was a virgin, but he never explained why he took them in the first place. Detectives decided to use that confession to their advantage. They arrested him for burglary and took him down to the station for questioning. Meanwhile, officers continued searching his apartment. And that's when they found an empty hacksaw package. Considering the killer had dismembered the victim, this discovery sent an immediate chill through the room. But the deeper they looked, the worse it got. Police found 2 USB drives filled with illegal material, along with a pair of women's underwear hidden in the closet. When investigators checked his computer, they discovered that Stephen had been visiting Lauren's social media pages obsessively. At the same time, his browser history showed he'd been consuming violent and disturbing adult content sometimes while looking at Lauren's photos. And even that wasn't the end of it. Detectives found links to online forums where Stephen had been writing graphic stories about murdering and torturing women, and one of the final searches in his browser history was the trash collection schedule for their city. All of this convinced detectives beyond any doubt that Stephen was involved in Lauren's murder. To them, it was clear that he'd been obsessed with her. And since he had a key to her apartment, plus Lauren's repeated complaints about things being moved around while she was gone, the picture started to come together. Stephen had been sneaking into her home all along. Still, there was one major problem. They didn't yet have any solid evidence directly linking him to the crime. During questioning, detectives tried everything they could to get a confession, but Stephen's behavior was pretty weird. For hours, he sat motionless, answering in a barely audible voice, repeating only 3 phrases. Yes, no, and I don't know.
And you've lived next to Lauren for a long time?
Yes.
Have you ever seen her with that dress on?
No.
You have no idea where she's at?
No.
Just tell me what happened, brother.
I don't know.
The detectives grew increasingly frustrated. They pressured him, even tried the classic bluff, claiming they'd found his DNA at the crime scene and that the only thing that could help him now was to confess. But Stephen, who'd studied law himself, didn't fall for it. He stayed completely calm, emotionless, and silent.
You know what's crazy? I was talking to people that he works with and everything. They talk about how he's always expresses himself.
But he don't know.
He's very talkative. Stephen, they say you're so talkative, buddy, that you always so friendly. You stop in and say hello, and you talk. Why is it that you're acting so short with us tonight? If you have all this character and personality about you, why is it that everything that we get from you is yes, no, or I don't know?
I don't know.
Well, you sure were talking to the media tonight, weren't you?
They asked what happened.
Yeah, that's what we're asking you. What happened? What'd you tell them?
I told them
You
what
didn't-
I knew.
That you didn't know. Hmm?
Do you realize how you're talking right now? Does it not feel weird to you?
No.
Would you say that this is how you talk all the time?
I don't understand.
You're just not expressing yourself at all. Everything's with you is yes, no, I don't remember, I don't understand. You can't help me out with anything. There's nothing you can tell me to help me about this beautiful girl right here, Stephen. That was your friend. Nothing. You gonna let things go down like this?
I don't know what you want.
I want the truth, Stephen. We just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell it, so you didn't look like a monster at the end. Because you know what? I don't believe that you're a monster, Stephen. I believe that you're a good guy. You've been picked on. Girls didn't show you the respect that you deserved. You did something stupid. And I believe you feel bad about it. And that's why you're all freaked out right now. But I'm giving you the opportunity to get right. I'm giving you an opportunity to show everybody you're not a monster, that you feel bad about what happened. Your hair's there, man. Your hair is there. We got your hair with the body. How's that, Stephen?
I don't know.
Yes, you do know. Yes, you do know, Stephen. That's right, buddy. See that? Look at it. See how easy? It happens. And it happened to you. Why, Stephen?
I don't understand.
Oh, you understand. You understand exactly what I'm saying. See this stuff right here, your hair? Yeah, it fell out of your head when you was moving the body, Stephen. That's right. You remember moving the body?
No.
Yes, you do, Stephen.
Eventually, the detectives left him alone in the interrogation room, and Stephen just sat there for a long time, perfectly still staring blankly at the wall.
Just stay right here, okay?
Okay.
I appreciate all your cooperation tonight, okay?
Okay.
Officers also asked him to remove his shirt so they could check for any recent injuries. That's when they noticed several scratches across his torso, marks that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. When asked about them, Stephen simply said he had no idea where they came from. Maybe, he suggested, he'd scratched himself in his sleep. Police eventually realized there was no way they'd get a confession out of Stephen. So, they shifted their focus to finding hard evidence. They began combing through every inch of the apartment complex, and soon, they caught a break. In a maintenance room, officers discovered a hacksaw that perfectly matched the packaging found in Stephen's apartment. It had clearly been scrubbed clean, but experts still managed to find tiny fragments of human tissue on the blade, and DNA test confirmed they belonged to Lauren. From there, detectives traced the purchase of that same saw back to a local hardware store and pulled the surveillance footage from that day. On the video, clear as day, was Stephen McDaniel buying the saw himself. Investigators also interviewed the maintenance worker who had access to that room, but the man provided a solid alibi for the night of the murder that left only one person who could have opened the door: Stephen, the man with a master key. Detectives then started digging deeper into his background and talking to people who knew him. Everyone described Stephen as quiet, withdrawn, and just strange, but also very intelligent. Several classmates mentioned that when he met new people, he would ask them two unsettling questions. What would you do in a zombie apocalypse? And how would you commit the perfect murder? Because of his odd behavior, he didn't really have any friends, and most classmates avoided him outside of school. The only person who had ever shown him any real kindness was Lauren herself. Though she found his behavior somewhat odd, she always treated him with genuine respect and warmth. Over the 3 years they lived as neighbors, Stephen had asked her out on multiple occasions, but Lauren consistently and politely declined. Outside of his studies, he led an extremely isolated life, rarely leaving his apartment with the curtains perpetually drawn and no visitors ever coming or going. In the weeks after Stephen's arrest, police continued hunting for additional evidence and scouring the surrounding areas for the rest of Lauren's remains, yet both efforts proved fruitless. The sole concrete discovery was a lab report verifying that a pair of women's underwear recovered from his apartment belonged to Lauren. Then, investigators stumbled upon something far more disturbing. On one of the memory cards taken from his home, they found a video recorded mere hours before Lauren's death. Using a long wooden pole, Stephen had attached a small camera and extended it up to her window to secretly record the interior of her apartment. This chilling footage removed any remaining doubts about his involvement. A few weeks later, he was formally charged not only with Lauren's murder, but also with 30 counts of possessing illegal material involving minors. As the case headed to trial, Stephen entered a not guilty plea while prosecutors declared they would pursue the death penalty. His defense attorney, who had previously taught both Lauren and Stephen, suggested police may have planted evidence to frame his client and argued against capital punishment by noting Lauren's own public opposition to it. The judge ultimately sided with the prosecution. The path to trial stretched on for years as prosecutors realized their largely circumstantial evidence might not guarantee a conviction, especially with the high burden required for the death penalty. After careful thought, they extended a strategic plea deal. If Stephen provided a full, detailed confession and pleaded guilty to the murder, they would drop all charges related to the illegal materials and remove the death penalty from consideration. In 2014, 3 years after the crime, Stephen accepted. In his confession, he described dressing completely in black with mask and gloves around 4:30 a.m., using a spare key to quietly enter Lauren's apartment despite her door security brace. He crept into her bedroom and watched her sleep for some time until a floor creak woke her. Startled to see the masked intruder, she ordered him to leave, but he attacked, choking her as she desperately fought back. At one point, she pulled off his mask and recognized him as Stephen. She pleaded for her life, but he continued until she stopped breathing after nearly 15 minutes. He left her body in the bathroom overnight, then returned the next evening with tools including a hacksaw to dismember her. He bagged the pieces and dumped them in various dumpsters near the university, placing the torso in the bin right by their complex. Afterward, he cut up and flushed his mask, gloves, and shirt. Stephen claimed he didn't fully understand why he did it, describing a mental blackout and even insisting he believed she was still alive, which is why he joined the search. Prosecutors rejected this explanation, pointing instead to his long-standing obsession with Lauren, evidenced by his secret window video, disturbing online activity, and fascination with violent fantasies toward women. With Lauren about to move away permanently, they believed he acted out of desperate possessiveness. His confession sealed the outcome. Stephen McDaniel received a life sentence with the possibility of parole in 2041. 4 years later, he appealed while representing himself. alleging police misconduct during interrogation and ineffective assistance from his original lawyer. The court denied the appeal, as did a subsequent one in 2022. Some family members continue to claim he was framed, with his father briefly launching a fundraising page for new legal help that received no donations and was soon removed. Stephen remains incarcerated today, still fighting his conviction, though legal experts widely agree he will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments, and hit the like button if you found this video compelling. Thanks for watching. Let's move on to the next case. When a young woman suddenly stopped answering calls and disappeared without a word, her family immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. Police quickly launched an investigation, and at first it looked like the case would be solved without much difficulty. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the truth was far more complicated than anyone expected. What happened next resembled something straight out of a crime thriller, and when the shocking reality was finally uncovered, it stunned people across the country. Andrea was born on April 17, 1991, in Flint, Michigan. She lost her mother at a young age, and after some time, her father remarried. The family later settled in the small town of Otisville, where Andrea completed high school. After graduating, she found work at a nearby supermarket. Although she considered going to college, she hadn't yet decided what she wanted to study, so she focused on working and putting money aside for the future. While at the supermarket, she met a 19-year-old co-worker named Kenneth, and before long, the two began dating. In November 2011, when Andrea was 20, her aunt and uncle left town and asked her to watch over their house while they were away. Since she was still living with her parents, she moved into their home for a few days. During the first part of their trip, Kenneth and another friend stopped by to spend time with her, watching movies and hanging out. They later made plans to meet again on the evening of November 14. Andrea was supposed to pick Kenneth up that night, but shortly beforehand she texted him, saying she couldn't make it. Instead, she asked him to come to her aunt and uncle's house and bring a few movie DVDs. Kenneth arrived around 7:30 p.m., only to find the house completely dark. The doors were locked, Andrea's car was gone, and no one answered when he knocked. He called her several times without success and assumed she had stepped out for a while, so he waited. Roughly 30 minutes later, Andrea finally sent him a text explaining that her plans had changed and that they would see each other the following day. She never mentioned where she was, and she ignored every message Kenneth sent after that. The next day passed without a single word from Andrea. At first, Kenneth was the only one concerned because her family believed she was still staying at her relative's home. But when another day went by and Andrea wasn't answering her father's calls either, he began to worry. He asked another family member to check the house, and she went there with Kenneth. They searched around the property and looked through the windows, but no one was inside. Andrea's father then contacted her friends, only to discover that none of them had spoken to her in over a day. Fearing the worst, the family organized a search. Friends and relatives split into groups and drove through nearby towns, parks, and other places Andrea might have gone. Later that evening, one of her friends found Andrea's car abandoned in a remote area near a national park, only a few miles from her aunt and uncle's house. The vehicle was unlocked, the keys were missing, and Andrea was nowhere to be found. Her father immediately contacted police. After notifying Andrea's uncle, officers forced their way into the house. In the basement, they made a devastating discovery. Andrea was sitting in a chair with a fatal gunshot wound to the head. An autopsy later confirmed she had been killed by a single gunshot fired from several feet away. Investigators determined she had died 2 days before her body was found, on the very night she unexpectedly canceled her plans with Kenneth. The medical examiner also found marks on her wrists, indicating she had been restrained with plastic zip ties, even though the restraints themselves were missing. Evidence suggested they had been removed 6 or 7 hours after her death, leading investigators to believe the killer had either returned later or remained inside the house for hours after the murder. Detectives also discovered that several items had been taken from the home, but the scene didn't resemble a typical burglary. Expensive valuables had been left untouched, while unusual items including a bottle of perfume, a sweater, a camera, 3 knives, a rifle, some ammunition, and a small amount of cash were missing. Jewelry and even a piece of solid gold left in plain sight had been ignored. As crime scene investigators processed the house, detectives learned Andrea had a boyfriend and immediately went to question Kenneth. He willingly described the last time he had seen her, provided fingerprints and a DNA sample without hesitation, and allowed police to collect the clothes he had worn that evening and search his home. Nothing suspicious was found. Even so, investigators continued to focus on him and gradually began treating him as their primary suspect. Kenneth firmly denied any involvement and even agreed to take a polygraph examination, which indicated no signs of deception. He explained that after Andrea unexpectedly canceled their plans on November 14, he was heartbroken and assumed she intended to end their relationship. He went home, charged his phone, and texted a female friend, telling her he believed Andrea was about to break up with him. After exchanging messages for a while, he drove to the store where she worked. They continued talking there before she invited him to watch a movie with her and her roommate later that night. Kenneth arrived at their apartment around 10 p.m., something both women later confirmed. His cell phone records also supported his story by placing him near their location at that time. Surveillance footage additionally captured him at a gas station about 20 minutes earlier, along the route between the store and the apartment. That same evening, investigators learned that someone had withdrawn $300 using Andrea's bank card in the town of Davison, roughly a 30-minute drive from her aunt and uncle's house. The withdrawal occurred only 7 minutes after Kenneth arrived at his friend's apartment, making it impossible for him to have been in both places at once. Even with that evidence, detectives still weren't prepared to rule him out. Kenneth remained with his friends until around midnight before finally heading home. The next morning, he tried calling Andrea several times, but she never picked up. Concerned, he drove back to her relative's house around 10 a.m. and knocked on the door, but there was still no sign of her. So, he left. By about 11 a.m., he was back home. Something confirmed by both his family members and his phone's location data. At almost the exact same time, another $300 was withdrawn from Andrea's account. This time, in a different town, even farther away. Police also got hold of surveillance footage showing the person using her card. The quality was too poor to make out a face, but one detail stood out. The suspect had arrived in a white pickup truck. But even with all the evidence pointing away from him, police still weren't ready to let Kenneth off the hook. They thought there were a few things about his story that didn't add up. First, he had admitted that he drove to Andrea's relative's house right around the time she was killed and sat in his car outside for about half an hour, which sounded weird for detectives. Second, when Andrea's friends and family organized a search for her on the evening of November 15th, Kenneth told them he wouldn't be joining because he had to work early the next morning. Later, he explained to detectives that he'd already spent the entire day trying to find her, calling her over and over, and figured she was just ignoring him. In his mind, Andrea had probably decided to break up with him, not that something bad had happened. Another red flag came up when one of Kenneth's friends, who'd been out searching for Andrea, asked him for the address of her relative's house. For some reason, Kenneth gave him the wrong location about 3 miles from the real one. Investigators thought this was strange since Kenneth had spent plenty of time there before. None of this was solid proof of guilt, but detectives pressed him harder and harder, piling on over 10 hours of interrogations. and eventually, police announced that Kenneth had finally confessed to the crime. In his written confession, Kenneth claimed that he went over to Andreas that night and walked into the house. When he went down to the basement, he said he saw her body lying on the floor and assumed she did it herself. According to him, that's when he decided to stage the scene to look like a murder, so her family wouldn't find out the truth. He admitted to taking a few items that were lying nearby, but offered little else. The confession itself was short, vague, and full of ambiguous wording. Kenneth insisted he hadn't killed Andrea, only that he'd found her body. But detectives believed they finally had what they needed, and they placed him under arrest. The moment police told him he was being charged with murder, Kenneth immediately tried to retract his statement. He said detectives had pressured him for hours, hammering him with accusations until he was completely exhausted. Finally, they told him that if he just wrote down a version of events where he found Andrea's body, they would let him go home. Kenneth said he believed them, but instead his so-called confession became the cornerstone of the case against him. He also claimed detectives repeatedly misled him. They told him they had solid forensic evidence tying him to the crime, and that he had failed the polygraph miserably. But the most shocking detail came out later. Kenneth's grandfather had actually hired a lawyer and sent him to the station to help. When the attorney tried to find out where Kenneth was being held, one of the detectives simply hung up the phone and then warned his colleagues not to reveal Kenneth's location to anyone. The lawyer spent the entire day calling every officer he could reach, but no one would give him answers. Meanwhile, Kenneth had no idea that the lawyer was even trying to reach him, and he continued talking to detectives alone. According to Kenneth, his so-called confession was nothing more than him parroting back what detectives told him to say, just so they'd finally let him go home. In reality, he claimed he had no idea Andrea was even dead. Less than 24 hours after Andrea's body was found, detectives announced they had their killer. Kenneth's friends and family refused to believe he was involved, but at that point, there wasn't much they could do. Meanwhile, police basically shut down the investigation, convinced Kenneth's confession would be enough to secure a conviction. Forensics, however, painted a very different picture. Lab experts tested dozens of samples collected from the house, including skin found under Andrea's fingernails. The DNA turned out to belong to an unknown male, and it was definitively not a match to Kenneth. Later, another sample was recovered from Andrea's car, and it matched that same unidentified man. Then there was the whole deal with Andrea's bank card. Someone had been draining her account, but it clearly wasn't Kenneth. And police still had no clue who that mystery man could be. Despite these glaring red flags, just days after Kenneth's arrest, detectives claimed they had new evidence. One officer opened the sealed bag containing Kenneth's clothes from the night Andrea vanished and noticed a single bloody hair stuck to his pants. Test revealed the hair and blood both belonged to Andrea. But this supposed smoking gun had a huge problem. The pants themselves show no trace of blood, not even microscopic particles. The forensic specialist who examined the item concluded that the hair must have landed there hours after Andrea's death, because if Kenneth had been wearing those pants during the murder, blood spatter would have been unavoidable. Kenneth's lawyer argued that the hair was most likely contamination. Police had grabbed Kenneth's clothes barely 30 minutes after Andrea's body was found. It was entirely possible that an officer, still carrying trace evidence from the crime scene, accidentally transferred the hair onto the pants while packing up his belongings. Kenneth's lawyer also pushed to have his confession thrown out, arguing that police had deliberately blocked him from seeing his client during questioning. On top of that, portions of the interrogation video had mysteriously gone missing. Precisely the parts where, according to Kenneth, detectives were practically feeding him the right answers. The legal back and forth dragged on for 4 years until the court finally sided with the prosecution and ruled the confession would stay in. During all this time, Kenneth remained out on bail, but he was far from free. He had to wear a GPS ankle monitor and wasn't allowed to leave his house without police approval. The trial began in 2015, and the prosecution leaned on just two pillars: Kenneth's confession and the bloody hair found on his pants. Their theory was that the murder was committed during a robbery, even though none of the stolen items ever turned up in Kenneth's possession, and the victim's bank card was clearly used by someone else. The prosecutor tried to smooth over the contradiction by suggesting the robbery was staged. In other words, he argued Kenneth killed Andrea to steal money and valuables, yet also insisted he faked the robbery. This argument was shaky at best, especially since Kenneth's family was well off and he wasn't desperate for cash. The prosecution also pointed to another detail. There were no signs of forced entry at the house, and Kenneth had a spare key. Andrea had given it to him just a few days before she died so he could stop by whenever he wanted. But Kenneth insisted he had left the key on a table in the house 2 days before her death. His friend, who had been with him that day, backed up his story, and sure enough, police eventually found the spare key right where he said it would be. The defense, on the other hand, pointed to countless inconsistencies in the case and outright sloppy police work. They also highlighted something investigators seemed to ignore. Andrea's car had been taken and later abandoned a few miles from the house. Her father testified that the car had one particular problem. Oil constantly leaked onto the floor under the driver's seat, which meant Andrea's shoes were always stained. By that logic, anyone who drove the car would have gotten oil on their soles too. Yet, when experts examined Kenneth's boots, there wasn't a trace of it. The prosecutor fired back with a new theory. Kenneth must have had an accomplice. According to this version, Kenneth killed Andrea while the accomplice took the stolen items, drove off in her car, and used her bank card. But another problem loomed over the prosecutor's case. The murder weapon was never found. Investigators determined that the missing rifle from Andrea's uncle's house didn't match the bullet that killed her, and neither did Kenneth's parents' guns. Finally, Kenneth's lawyer accused police of completely overlooking other viable suspects. From the very beginning, they had tunnel vision on Kenneth and never gave anyone else a serious look. To prove the point, the defense presented a list of 5 potential suspects, and on the top of that list was a man named Jeffrey, a mutual acquaintance of both Kenneth and Andrea. There were a few red flags around Jeffrey. First, he was the one who just happened to find Andrea's car in the early hours of the search, even though it was parked miles away from her house in a fairly secluded spot. Second, that same day, he called Kenneth asking questions about Andrea's whereabouts. The odd thing was, Kenneth had never given him his number. Investigators later learned Andrea had scribbled his number on a piece of paper and left it on a nightstand right next to where an unidentified DNA sample was later recovered. On top of all that, Jeffrey owned a car that looked very similar to the one caught on surveillance footage at a gas station when someone was withdrawing money with Andrea's bank card. Andrea's brother also pointed investigators toward another possible suspect. He admitted that he had been struggling with drugs at the time and owed money to a local dealer. According to him, this dealer somehow knew Andrea had been saving a good amount of cash from her job. That's why her brother believed the dealer might have killed Andrea to get the money he was owed. There was also a young man named David who came onto police radar after his own father caught in a tip, telling them his son could be involved in Andrea's murder. David already had a criminal history tied to car thefts and assaults, and he even resembled the man seen withdrawing money from Andrea's bank card. Despite all this, detectives claimed they had looked into each of these leads, but couldn't find any hard evidence linking them to the crime. When the trial wrapped up, the jury deliberated for 2 full days before reaching a verdict. In the end, they found Kenneth guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. His lawyer immediately filed an appeal. At first, the defense tried to overturn the conviction by arguing that Kenneth's confession was coerced and that police illegally denied him access to a lawyer. But the court rejected that motion. Next, the defense focused on the robbery charge, pointing out that Kenneth was also found guilty of theft, even though none of the stolen items were ever recovered. That appeal also went nowhere, but the third attempt finally paid off. Kenneth's lawyer discovered a serious mistake in the jury paperwork. On the verdict forms, jurors were given two separate murder charges to consider: first degree and second degree. For the first degree charge, they had both options: guilty or not guilty. But for second degree, there was only one option listed: guilty. In other words, the jury had no way to find Kenneth not guilty on the second-degree charge. Their only choice was to decide how guilty he was. The appeals court couldn't ignore such a major flaw. And in 2018, Kenneth was granted a brand new trial. By that point, he had already spent 3 years behind bars. And after the ruling, he was released on bail once again. Since then, Kenneth's lawyer kept pushing for new evidence, something that could finally point to the real killer. He repeatedly urged police to retest the existing DNA samples, and in 2022, they finally agreed to launch a fresh review. By that time, Kenneth's new trial still hadn't begun, and he remained out on bail. Forensic experts went back through every unidentified male DNA sample connected to the case. But once again, there were no matches in the FBI's database. So they focused on the strongest piece of evidence they had: a cigarette butt found outside the house. That sample matched the same man whose skin cells had been discovered under Andrea's fingernails, leaving no doubt he was the real killer. Investigators sent the cigarette butt to Arthram, a company specializing in forensic genetic genealogy. In January 2023, experts reported a breakthrough. By searching public genetic databases and tracing family connections, they had identified a likely suspect. It was a 42-year-old man named Chadwick Moley, someone who had never even come up in the original case files. Detectives learned that at the time of Andrea's murder, Chadwick had been living just 40 minutes away in a neighboring town. They pulled his phone records from November 2011 and found out that on the day Andrea was killed, his phone pinged off a tower near her aunt and uncle's house 23 times. By 2023, Chadwick was living in Utah, working as a delivery driver and staying out of his van. Investigators reached out to local police, asking them to secretly collect something with his DNA on it. But there was a problem, since Chadwick usually parked in open areas. Tailing him without being noticed was nearly impossible. For the next 2 months, officers quietly kept Chadwick under surveillance, hoping he would throw away something that could provide a usable DNA sample. But despite their efforts, they came up empty-handed. With no other option, detectives obtained a warrant and approached Chadwick directly to collect his DNA. During the interview, he insisted he had nothing to do with Andrea's murder. However, the laboratory results told a very different story. His DNA matched the evidence found beneath Andrea's fingernails, inside her car, and at several locations throughout the house. Then came another major breakthrough. A search of Chadwick's van uncovered a revolver, and forensic testing confirmed it was the same firearm used to kill Andrea. Just 2 days after speaking with him, officers returned to take Chadwick into custody, only to discover he had disappeared. Sometime after that initial conversation, he had simply driven away without telling anyone where he was headed. Nearly 3 weeks later, authorities tracked him down in Montana, close to the Canadian border, and placed him under arrest. But the case took yet another unbelievable turn. While officers were transporting him to the airport to extradite him back to Michigan, Chadwick somehow managed to free himself from both his handcuffs and leg restraints before escaping from the transport van. Once again, he vanished. A few days later, a sheriff on routine patrol unexpectedly spotted him paddling a canoe down a nearby river. That chance encounter led to his recapture, and this time he was successfully returned to Michigan, where he was jailed to await trial. Given that he had already escaped custody twice, the court denied him bail without hesitation. Chadwick entered a plea of not guilty, while prosecutors prepared to present their case. For investigators, the situation had become deeply embarrassing. They had spent more than 10 years insisting Kenneth was responsible for Andrea's murder, despite now having DNA evidence and the murder weapon pointing squarely at Chadwick. Detectives even explored whether the two men might have known each other or worked together, but they found absolutely no connection. Kenneth and Chadwick had never crossed paths, and there was no indication Andrea knew Chadwick either. At the time of the murder, Chadwick was a 32-year-old man living in a neighboring town with no known ties to the victim. Even with this overwhelming evidence, Kenneth's conviction remained in place. Instead of dismissing the case against him, prosecutors announced they intended to move forward with another trial, arguing that Kenneth and Chadwick had acted together. In the end, Chadwick never faced a full trial. In February 2025, he entered a no-contest plea, choosing not to challenge the charges, while also refusing to formally admit guilt. He told the judge he had been heavily intoxicated on the night Andrea was killed and could not remember what happened, though he did not deny being involved. During that hearing, another troubling detail emerged. Detectives had actually considered Chadwick as a possible suspect in the earliest days of the investigation. Yet for reasons no one could explain, his name never officially became part of the case file. By that point, investigators had already locked onto Kenneth as their primary suspect, despite the DNA evidence excluding him and the fact that the murder weapon had never been linked to him. Chadwick was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before leaving the courtroom, he apologized directly to Andrea's family for his actions. But for Kenneth, the ordeal was far from over. His attorney immediately asked the court to dismiss the remaining charges, but prosecutors refused, insisting Chadwick's conviction did not rule out Kenneth's alleged involvement. They remained determined to pursue a second trial even after Chadwick himself stated he acted alone and had never known either Kenneth or Andrea. That new trial is now scheduled for January 2026, while Kenneth continues living under house arrest with an electronic ankle monitor. Meanwhile, his legal team hired a respected forensic specialist who reviewed the bloodstained hair found on Kenneth's pants. The expert reached the same conclusion as the earlier analysis, that the hair could only have been transferred several hours after Andrea's death, not during the murder itself. Considering the DNA evidence, the recovered murder weapon, Chadwick's conviction, and the forensic findings, Kenneth appears to have a strong chance of finally proving his innocence. Even so, the years he lost can never be returned. More than 14 years of his life have been consumed by prison, house arrest, and legal battles. Even if his name is eventually cleared, the time taken from him is gone forever. And should he choose to seek accountability from the investigators and prosecutors responsible for the case against him, that fight could stretch on for years, with no certainty that justice will ever fully make up for everything he endured. Let me know what you think about this case in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like before you go.